Titan Talk is proudly sponsored by Barefoot. Barefoot shoes make grizzled minimalist footwear for all your athletic, outdoor, and everyday endeavors. These shoes are actually made for your feet with a super wide toe box, a flat outsole, and extreme grip pattern, giving you inhumane strength and stability when you need it for your hardest training sessions or most rigorous trails. Each shoe is made using US-sourced high-quality leather and canvas, which conforms to your feet over time, giving you added comfort with each step while protecting your feet and giving them ample freedom to function as nature intended. Listeners of Titan Talk can use code TITAN to get a free pair of awesome wraps with their shoe purchase at barefoot.store. These are a versatile wrap designed to enhance joint support in your ankle, wrist, or elbow so you can move more mass with each lift. Again, that's code TITAN for a free pair of awesome wraps at barefoot.store.
Through all corners of the universe, there echoes the heartbeat of power, a pulsing bond shared by all things. Let's embark on a journey and discover the stories entwined with Strain.
Hello, my friends out there in this universe of power. Welcome to Titan Talk. I am back in South Texas after my trip to Orlando, Florida for America's Strongest Man. And wow, what a trip it was. There was a lot of experience gained. And I tell you what, that's the exact reason I set out to compete at this event, the nation's title. I didn't think I would be returning to strongman this quickly. If you've been following along the show and my career, I had a pretty bad back injury at the early start of summer, an injury that left me borderline paralyzed for the better part of 2 days, maybe a little bit more. But it was very shaking and down to my core, to where I did not know what my future as a strongman would still hold when I would get back to the sport. Throughout the early part of the summer, all I could do was think about how badly I got hurt and how badly I don't want it to happen again. But over the course since then, my body has really impressed me in how resilient it is and how it has come back from that event. I spent a lot of the summer transforming myself to conquer the mountains. If you got to listen to the last episode of Titan Talk, I went into great detail on what those mountain conquests entailed. But I very much transformed my body. I lost over 40 pounds in that endeavor, and in coming back to strongman, I gained the majority of that weight back, although I do feel like I truly brought a more conditioned version of myself back to strongman than the one that was previously at his peak of competition prior to the injury. But America's Strongest Man, like I said, the nation's title, this was very much a crash course right back into competition. And that's what I wanted. I originally set down this objective to compete at the nation's title for the sake of gaining experience. A lot of this year, I felt very burnt out in numerous ways, and I needed to rekindle a lot of the reasons why I love strongman. So my biggest objectives here are, one, gaining the experience, but two, having fun and really getting to live in the moment of contest. It's a very different type of moment in contest than anything you can replicate in training, which is why I'm a huge advocate of getting into contests. One of my personal philosophies that I carry with myself and a lot of the athletes that I coach is the sooner you get to any new stage or platform, the sooner you are able to conquer it. All too often you have athletes that are their biggest and most worst enemy in preventing themselves from getting through the door of that contest. Whereas you can gain so much more experience from that one day of competing, knowing how your body, your mind, your soul can handle that intense demand of contest will propel you further in your career than someone who just sits telling themselves that they're never good enough and that they keep holding back in getting through that door of contest. But I wanted to have fun with it. I wanted to gain the experience above all. And America's Strongest Man is something I always wanted to do. But I think back to the past couple years, and there always was something circumstantial, whether it was another contest or things going on in my family life or whatever it be, that was preventing me from getting into the show. And even in recent history, America's Strongest Man kind of fell short of the prestige it deserved for quite a while there. I don't remember exactly what year it was. I want to say maybe it was 2018, around there. There were only 3 athletes on that roster. It was Trey Mitchell, Wesley Claiborne, and Josh Reynolds. And, the 3 behemoths of athletes, but they went into the final event and they finished with a tie. And they had to split that with a 3-way tiebreaker. And it was just kind of one of those things where, it's the nation's title, but there's only 3 guys there. And these 3 guys are so well matched across these 3 events that they wind up finishing tied, and they have to dispute that tie with maybe an event that at the time we felt like was a very inadequate test of who truly was the strongest man. Regardless, there was only 3 guys, and it's America. It's the United States of America. We know how much talent and strength is here. So in the time since, Strongman Corporation has done an excellent job in growing America's Strongest Man and bringing it and elevating it to the platform and the prestige that nation's title deserves. And I mean, this year alone, first place walked away with $25,000. It's crazy. That's a big jump from any past ASMs. And second and third place made out with some really great money too. To where even I think third place walked away with $5,000. That is a tremendous payday. It is a real tremendous payday. But paydays aside, I went into this show not intending to win. I went into this show just to see where I'm at, to see what I needed to do to focus my efforts in training for next year. I know we all put pressure on ourselves sometimes to where whenever we might be making a comeback, it's got to be the most picture perfect comeback. You go and dominate. You have all these people's expectations that you meet and then exceed. No, this was not it. This was me throwing myself back into the rigors of contest. And this felt like a crash course into it. These events were heavy. This was a pro contest. Every athlete was a pro. None of these guys had weaknesses. And I'll get into that later, but it really was a no BS, like, let's freaking do this thing. So I wanted the experience to test my body's power and to test my body's integrity. Coming back from an injury, I had a very controlled training environment at home, but I needed to go into contests where those of us who compete know that environment, although controlled by the promoters and the staff who run it, it is not a controlled environment. Anything can happen, especially when you're demanding 100% at every freaking turn. I wanted to reveal my weaknesses, to lay the framework for what I need to focus on in this 2023-2024 holiday season. We like to call this the bulking season. There's a lot of downtime between contests, and most importantly, a lot of eating. So the fuel in which we channel towards all of our gains, this is the time to do it. And I wanted to know exactly where my objectives lie in terms of what I need to work for. And above all else, having fun, remembering the whys. It's so much fun being able to train and prep and build your body for something. And then on that day, you take off the chains, you slam that gas pedal down, and you see how fast you can take this vehicle of a body and how strong it can power itself. But this was much sooner of an entry back into strongman than I anticipated. So you could have asked me at any point over June, July, okay, when are you going to come back to strongman? And my answer would have been a little bit along the lines of, I don't know. Maybe sometimes towards the end of the year or sometime towards next year. But I was feeling so good after my mountains. So good after going to commentate at the Shaw Classic, seeing everyone there, what was done, what I knew I could do. I was very motivated. I got back, trained, everything was just on point with my training. I'm like, let's do this. It's the nation's title. Let's go and get the experience. So my prep was not too long. If you think of the time between the Shaw Classic and America's Strongest Man, that's less than 2 months. That was about a 6-week prep, I want to say. And the preliminary stage of that was testing my body to see, like, hey, can I do these events? Or are any of these events going to reveal some of that back injury stuff that happened earlier in May? So with that prep being only 6 weeks long and these events being true pro heavyweights, this really had to shape my competition goals in a certain way, and to where I could not expect such a crazy amount of myself. I mean, I wanted, this was very much, let's do our absolute best in training, do our absolute best in competition, see where those cards lie, and use that to propel everything from here on out. And that's what I did. But all along the way, in the 6 months of prep, I was very weary of that old injury. And for those of you who might not be aware or can't remember, that injury that I sustained in early summer that I keep referring to, that was sustained during a deadlift. My best event, somehow I had a very traumatic happening on that deadlift day that went straight to my lower back, the lower right area, my kind of like where the back meets the pelvis, the SI area, and I was very weary of it. Anytime I did anything backloaded, we did not have a barbell deadlift at ASM, but it was a Ukrainian deadlift. We had stones, we had yokes, farmer's walks. There was a lot of things to where the back could have easily gotten pissed off, and I was very weary of that. It was hard for me to embody that old YOLO mindset of let's just freaking go at every training session, 110%, the body will keep up some way or another. No, this was a little bit more enlightened in knowing that my body is not superhuman and that it has broken down before. I need to make sure to preserve it for its performance. So the reality of my performance state going into America's Strongest Man was not someone who was going with the intent of winning. Someone who did not think he was going to go and place podium. I knew I was going to give it my all, but this was very different from any competition endeavor I had in the past, to where the goal was to go in there and just freaking dominate. No, this was go in there, do what I can, and let's walk out with the experience. That is the trophy that I wanted, was the experience. But even with this mindset of not putting crazy amounts of pressure on myself and just doing my best and seeing where the cards fall, the final weeks of prep were, the last 2 weeks leading into ASM were still filled with some major mental happenings, if you will. I wasn't able to get as frequent of training sessions as I had really wanted to. And, that last week especially, we put such a tremendous amount of pressure. Like, I have to do this. I have to drill these events X amount of times. I have to hit the whole contest, know where I'm at, to leave with the confidence that I know I need to have going into the event, to arm myself with all the physical and mental strength possible. There's a ton of self-imposed pressure on those last couple weeks. And sometimes it's a little bit more than we bite off more than we can chew, and we're not able to fulfill these crazy projections we have for ourselves and what we can get done in training. I had to remind myself that the biggest reality with those final weeks of prep is getting the body as confident in itself, as able as possible, giving yourself the, doing everything you can to make your performance, not there in training, but in competition, as strong as it possibly could be. And having a crazy amount of frequent training sessions, although it can arm you with confidence and you can leave no stone unturned, so to speak, it could possibly still wear down the body. So you have to take it with a grain of salt if you're not able to do it as frequently as possible. Like, yeah, you did not get to do these things as rigorously as you could, but you are just a little bit more fresh than you would have been had you done it. So I had to battle with that inner struggle. And then there were the mental battles with my former self in accepting the fact that I was competing without the need for winning. Like I just said, this was very different from any other competitive endeavor I have done before, to where I was going into a contest already knowing I wasn't going to win. And that was a weird thing, because I knew in the areas where I was falling short of my expectations going into the events at America's Strongest Man, and the amount of negative talk that was going on in my mind at times was not fun to deal with, because I was like, Gabe, you're more capable than this. These numbers or your performance are not up to your own expectations, whatever it be. I was playing a lot of battles in here in my mind, and that made for some very tough days. And I really wish that I was a little bit more effective at quelling those voices, because there were days where I was grumpy and I was just not in a pleasant mood, and that kind of extended beyond myself into the interactions I had with my family. And looking back on it now, I know that if I were to go through the whole thing again, I'd be a little bit better off, because I'm more equipped. I've done it already. I know how to handle it. I know now the strategies on what to tell myself to quell those voices of negativity. But in the moment, there were times where, even just interacting with my wife or daughter were a little bit less than what they should have been, because I was just so damn hard on myself from what I expected for contest. But this was a new realm. It was a new realm, and I had not gotten to experience this this version of Gabe, who was going into a contest without wanting to win at least something. So that was the prep. The competition date got here much sooner than anticipated, and then it was time to travel. With there not being as much pressure on me to do well, with me just going for the experience, there were things that I did with getting set up in my departure, my travel, and my whole stay while there in Orlando that were a little bit different than I would have done on any other contest. For one, I opted to drive, and I'll go into a little bit later with how this shaped my performance. But plane tickets, but with the short time frame I gave myself to prep for this, I just decided to drive. It was going to be a little bit more affordable, and I knew, why am I going to spend all these crazy amounts of money when I'm just going for the experience? So I opted to drive to Florida. I also drove on literally a nonstop stretch from South Texas all the way to Florida, and that was 19 hours. And I did that without really stopping. When I left on Wednesday. I left on Wednesday, and it was Wednesday the 8th. I left probably around 5 p.m. from Texas, and I drove straight through the night. I wanted to get there in one stretch. I knew on Thursday I would have a rules meeting that I needed to be at to check in, then we'd compete on Friday. So somewhere along the lines, around Mississippi to Alabama, I'm drinking my Rain energy drink, having some caffeine to keep me up. But around 4:30 a.m., I'm just getting tired. And driving through those stretches of forest road, it is the I-10 highway, but you got big trees on either side, the dark of night. I was getting dreary, and I didn't want to start hallucinating. So I pulled over at a rest stop. I slept for an hour and a half, and then I finished the rest of the stretch. I got to Orlando around 3 p.m. that next day after driving 19 hours relatively straight with only one stop. And that was it was a long distance, a really long distance. It took a lot out of me, but I checked into my hotel. I ate some food, and then I went to the rules meeting. Now, like I was saying, I did some things differently than I would have done on a normal contest, where I was going to give myself the best nourishing environment possible for winning a show. I stayed at a hotel that was maybe about 12 to 15 minutes away from the competition site in the host hotel. Again, for affordability reasons. By the time I had decided to jump into the contest, the host hotel was filled, and even before it was filled, it was just a crazy amount of money per night compared to some of these other hotels. So I stayed further away. But that also meant that now I had to get around Orlando, Florida, a big city, and there's traffic. This is a city with Universal Studios and a Disney resorts, and it's just like, one thing I did not factor in was the amount of traffic and getting back and forth. And then this is at the Olympia. This is at the Orange County Convention Center in the Olympia, one of the biggest sports festivals in the world. So parking was an absolute nightmare. So there were some logistical issues with transportation and parking that added to a lot of stress on my end, and some more financial expenses too than I was anticipating. But these are things that I would not have really done if this was a contest that I was going to win. I would have stayed at the host hotel. I would have either flown or I would have driven with many days in advance of cushion. And I would have been there, like right close to the site, always very much in the heat of the atmosphere. There's value to being alone and to yourself, but that's what a hotel room is for. I have found that when you are at the host hotels, when you are at the competition venues, when you are constantly in that environment, maybe it's seeing fellow athletes in the lobby, your mind is in a state of constant stimulation to where you are getting very prepared and ready for the task ahead. Versus when you're locked away at a budget hotel 15 minutes down the road all alone to yourself, it's a very different environment. And there was a lot of times where I was feeling very alone. I traveled solo. I did not have my wife and my daughter with me. Didn't have any friends or handlers or anything. I was very much solo, driven across the country, 19 hours, in a very populated, traffic-ridden city. And this is for a big expo that, you have a lot of other people from all around the world trying to get around in this one specific area. So it did not feel as conducive as an environment for me to be just like totally sane and happy in. But the rules meeting was later on that day and Thursday after I had arrived. Getting there, it felt like, and listening to the rules meeting, I mean, this is Strongman Corporation. I mean, we've got James Deffenbaugh, Dion Masters, a lot of the usual staff that I remember from my time as an amateur at Strongman Nationals, at the Arnold Amateur World Championships. This felt very Strongman Corporation, like the rules meeting was pre-Nationals or pre-Arnold from back in the day. But instead of being surrounded by amateur athletes, or instead of being surrounded by athletes from all over the world, these were pros all from America. But it just had that nostalgic factor to where these same people that I remember fondly from my days where I was chasing that pro card are now giving us the rules briefing and going through the contest. It was kind of just like one of those illusions to where you can see both different occurrences. The Nationals, when I got my pro card, listening to that rules meeting, and then the rules meeting for here at the pro level of America's Strongest Man. There were parallels there, and it was interesting. But I finished up the rules meeting, got to see everyone. They had their game faces on, especially Bobby Thompson. He was asking these questions and getting everything, set in his mind to where he was really going to go to work that next day. I could definitely see the looks in Bobby's face, in Rob Kearney's face, where they had these eyes like they were there to win their 25K, which was weird for me sitting there because I'm like, I'm here to have a good time. But it was a good rules meeting. I went, had a nice juicy hamburger with a good friend of mine afterwards, a very enjoyable dinner. I went back to the hotel, rested, got to bed. Day one was the next day, and I was very glad that us heavyweight athletes were not going until 1 p.m. start time. This meant all the lighter athletes, the lightweight men, lightweight women, were in the morning block at the Olympia, and then we, the heavyweights, were in the afternoon block starting at 1 p.m. But waking up that next day, there's always this pre-contest ritual, and it all starts with breakfast. You got to get yourself fed, and for competition days, you're not going to get any stronger than you already are. You're not really doing any recovering at that point either. You should be well recovered. So the need to take in crazy amounts of protein is not really there. Instead, you need to be thinking of, I need to be giving my body fuel. The big fuel source is going to be carbohydrates. And then, of course, you want some fat to sustain your elevated energy levels and focus along with those carbs too. So that first day, I went into a Waffle House, got a big breakfast, an extra side of waffles, and just really loaded up. I was filled with carbs, ready to operate. I got back to the hotel, did some light foam rolling, some mobilizing. I know from what I've done in the past that a lot of these expo shows, the areas that the athletes will have to kind of warm up on or to get loose are very small and constricted sometimes. So if you want to lay down the ground and stretch, do some rolling back and forth, you want to have a lot of area to do it, I find it's best to do in the hotel. Don't wait to go to the contest venue, especially when you get there. You're going to see everyone warming up on all sorts of things. You're going to want to do the actual weights and not be doing everything that you know you should be doing to mobilize and loosening up on the floor. So I did at the hotel. Then I departed to the Olympia. Rather than try to take Ubers, I went ahead and took my vehicle there. The whole time while we were there the day prior for the rules meeting, I kept seeing these parking lots for $20 parking. And although I didn't want to do that, that was still going to be cheaper than doing Ubers back and forth. So I'm like, all right, I'll suck it up. I'll have the $20 parking. Here I am, small town boy in the big city. And like, okay, I'll do the $20 parking. But as I get there, everything's filled. All of these parking lots are filled. It's the Olympia. There's people walking around everywhere. The only place to park was the Hyatt Regency public parking garage, which was $35 a day. And so I get there and I'm realizing this reality, like, damn it, I thought that $20 parking was going to be expensive, but no, this is actually the reality. Like, I'm going to have to spend $35 a day for parking, whatever. I did it. The convenience of having my vehicle there and parking and getting to go into the expo and do my business was worth more to me than having to spend some extra money on parking. So I did. I walked to the Olympia. the expo is just booming with people, speaking all sorts of languages, just very similar to that Arnold Classic environment that I remember fondly. But the people were everywhere. I mean, you got all these content creators with their gimbaled cameras moving around. You've got people lined up to see all these bodybuilding and CrossFit and fitness figures, all the booths everywhere. I mean, it was just a booming environment. And then you have America's Strongest Man out in one of the back corners. And ironically, it always works out this way, but somehow the Olympia, management puts strongman right next to Zumba. The whole time that America's Strongest Man was going on, there was like this Zumba tournament right next door. So it was a very two contrasting stages. But anyways, getting there, I walked up to the area. I saw the stage. I saw the big Ukrainian deadlift apparatus, this massive structure, and I saw the back area where all the athletes were. And I was one of the latter ones to get there. It looked like a lot of these athletes had arrived pretty early on and they had their area set. Everyone was warming up, getting ready for that first event, the Axle Clean and Press. But the game faces were on. I saw Bobby, I saw Rob, I saw a lot of the newer pros that were fresh down their paths in their careers. Eric Dawson, a veteran. Alan Colley, a veteran. I mean, lots of guys there. But again, everyone was in the zone. Axle Clean and Press was up first. This was event one. My goal going into the Axle Clean and Press, with it being a max event, was to just hit the opener. My overhead presses historically are not my strongest event, and I'm never the strongest guy there, especially with coming back from having lost 40 pounds of body weight. My static strength on the overhead press, I was not going to be hitting any crazy records that day. The opening weight was 340, and this was close enough to my top end to where going into the show, even prior to leaving to get there in Orlando, I just wanted that 340 opener. That was it. I didn't want to mess around with any over-under grip cleans either. I wanted to do double overhand, protect my biceps, get that one rep, and then that was it. So in the warm-ups, I'm thinking I'm just loosening up my shoulders, doing some banded passovers, some rotator cuffs with a light weight, and then starting to, one thing that I do want to point out, an excellent warm-up exercise for almost any competition event is going to be air squats. Air squats or some lunges, something to really get your hips, your lower body, and even your core ready to brace yourself on any leg-driven or leg-carried motion. I just want to toss it out that is something that you should always have in any warm-up routine. But getting my shoulders primed, getting my legs and hips primed with good blood flow, and then I started doing the axle press itself. In my warm-ups, the axle was feeling much lighter than it should have been. Light to the point to where I was like, do these people know what this axle actually weighs? Because it's feeling very easy. I started having these thoughts in my mind come up like, well, maybe I will try the next one, the 360. Maybe we'll see what we can do today. But when it came time to go out there, they have this solid steel axle on these massive tires. I double over and clean it, get it up to my chest, and I give it a drive to an overhead press, and it falls just shy of lockout. And I'm like, oh, crap. I can feel all the eyes of everyone on me. I bring it back down to my chest. I'm not going to put it back down to the ground. I don't want to have to deal with another double overhead clean and have it wind up slipping out of my hands, ultimately having to over-under grip it and risk the biceps. I keep it on the chest, take a couple breaths in, and I give it absolutely everything I have and launch that thing, and it powers up to a full lockout. And there was kind of just like oh, thank God. I got the thing. But after missing it that first time, I obviously was holding back a little bit, or my legs were not able to give it the 100% of the leg drive that it needed. But I got that rep. I waved to the crowd. I told the staff that was it for me, and I went backstage, started getting myself ready. I am watching some of the other guys from backstage, and there's just this incredible battle going on between Rob Kearney and Lucas Hatton. They both hit 440, and they both attempt a new record at 460 plus, so whatever would have been the new record. Neither of them was able to get it that day, but I'm thinking to myself, this weight that they're doing is in excess of 100 pounds to the weight that I called it at. And you see it when Rob cleans it, when Lucas cleans it, that these guys, when they get that weight up to the chest. Imagine what 460 pounds does when you catch it at the chest and it kind of moves you back a little bit. There's got to be a lot of oh crap moments like, wow, that thing just really hit me and I've got to summon some power to propel it up overhead. I mean, my hat's off to them. It's just incredible to watch them both operate and how clean they made that 440 look. Both guys implementing a split jerk technique and both guys just absolute technicians with how smooth and how powerful it was. One thing I remember from that was watching Bobby Thompson go. We all know Bobby has the American log press record. We all know he has some of the strongest shoulders that have ever lived. And he was holding out on when he wanted to jump in until around 390 pounds. He knew that would have been easy weight for him. But Bobby had just gotten back from the Rogue Invitational the following weekend. I mean, even talking to him, his body was still feeling a little bit of wear and tear and being a bit beat up. But he goes in for his opener. It's like, all right, Bobby has skipped all the lighter weights. Here he is. Let's watch the American Nightmare. He cleans it. He goes for the press. On that press, the bar's a little bit lopsided. One side's not going up, and he doesn't get the press. He drops it down, and then he kind of just shakes his hands like he's done. He bails. Like that's it for him. And Bobby winds up pulling out of the entire contest from that first rep. And it's like, wow, what the hell's going on? I mean, this is the defending America's strongest man. This guy has the strongest shoulders in the country, at least on the log press. What the hell happened? I feared the worst, that he had popped a muscle off. I mean, Bobby's arms, both of them can tell a tale of some tremendous injuries he's had to sustain over the years. So I feared for the worst, but I mean, he was just feeling so banged up from the previous contest in a very heavy competitive season to where I think his brachialis or his brachioradialis, some of the elbow flexors in his arms were just getting so pissed off during that motion on both the clean and the compression of the press that he felt that if he continued, something even worse was going to happen, and he wanted to stay ahead of that. So he pulled out from the competition. And that was kind of a moment for all those guys that had originally, in their mind, like, oh, the reigning champion is coming. He's probably going to win. We'll vie for that second and third place. You kind of see that gear switch in those guys who knew that they had a shot at podium to where, like, Bobby's out. Let's go. 25K. And so that was interesting. And Bobby was okay. He wasn't seriously hurt. He was, definitely aching and hurting a little bit, but there was no crazy injuries. So that was the axle clean and press. Moving into the next event, the yoke and the farmer's walk medley. It would have been 1,000-pound yoke down 50 feet and then 380 pounds in each hand back 50 feet. Now, in my training, I had done plenty of heavy yokes. I had even trained in the weeks prior, like 2 weeks out from the contest. I trained 1,020 pounds in excess of that weight, and I was doing it in uneven ground here in the street outside of my house. So I felt totally confident in my ability to do 1,000-pound yoke. And the one thing that I had a little bit of apprehension to was at 380 pounds in each end farmers. I had recently just set a new training PR in doing 385 pounds in each hand farmers here. So with it being only 5 pounds less than my PR, but also being right after 1,000-pound yoke, that was the part that I was apprehensive on, is how is my body going to handle its ability to carry these farmers' walks up and down. So in the warm-ups, I wasn't doing too much. I was already very warmed up from the axle clean and press. I got a couple of yoke picks, making sure my height was where I needed to be. I took a couple of sprint steps down the course with 650 pounds, maybe no more than 20 feet tops. I did a couple farmers picks, made sure my back, my fingers were set, good blood flow in the hands, and that was it. I was even feeling so confident in my ability to at least go down the course in the yoke that Chris Matos, the media manager for Strongman Corporation, asked if he could mount a GoPro to my chest. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I'll get you some good footage. When it came time to the event execution, I was in the second heat to go. I was going up against Josh Hatfield at the time. Josh, a veteran strongman, one who has just been really crushing it, and he even competed at my contest Beerstone that I put on here back in 2021 or 2022. And I got under that yoke, 1,000 pounds. I push it up and I start walking. And as I'm walking, I feel all 1,000 pounds go down with a compressive force to that area of my back that I had injured back in May. And it hurt. It was crippling me to the point where every step that I took, I could feel that compression just squeeze and squeeze and squeeze to where I took it maybe about 15 feet and I had to put it down. And I'm just like, wow, this in the moment, I'm thinking this feels so crippling and so much harder than anything I could have thought it would have felt. But I take a couple breaths, I push it back up, and I want to start taking some more steps forward. As soon as I do, it feels like the lights are starting to go out. And simultaneously, every muscle down my posterior chain shuts down. And it doesn't just shut down, it starts going into spasms. My hamstrings are convulsing back and forth, my glutes, my calves. I pull myself out from under the yoke, and I'm literally having to hold on to that crossbar. And it looks like I'm twerking because my muscles are flexing, extending so fast and so rapidly. I'm moving up and down. And I'm just there, like with my vision, like on the very brink of complete blackout. And I'm thinking to myself, where is everyone? Like I'm about to fall backwards, and it seems like it takes an eternity for anyone to come up to me. But sooner or later, I feel some hands on my back, and people are holding me, making sure I don't fall. And I'm just like so in disbelief that this event that I thought I was going to do well on wound up crippling me and just completely destroying me. All of my muscles shut down, my posterior chain, my hamstrings, my back, my glutes. I had to be helped, assisted off the field. I couldn't walk off the field on my own. And there were moments where I'm sitting backstage and I'm thinking to myself, like, holy hell, is this it? Like, did we just re-injure the back? Is my back going to start locking up on me over the next few minutes to a point where I'm not going to be able to walk out of here? I've got 19 hours between me and South Texas that I'm going to have to drive home on my own. All these thoughts going through my mind as I'm being helped back to the athlete area. I sit down. I'm taking breaths. I'm waiting for my muscles to calm down. And you can imagine all the things that are going on internally and mentally. And I'm just worried. I'm worried that I had gotten back into strongman too soon. I'm worried that I had hurt myself again. I'm worried that I'm going to be paralyzed again. I'm worried that this is going to be it, that I'm done with strongman. But in the time that I'm sitting there, like, you know what? You're here. Get up, walk around. Let's loosen up. The last thing you want to be doing right now is just sitting completely still. Let's get some blood flow. Let's ambulate and let's assess the damage. So I did. I walked around and I was able to be walking around. I kind of regained my wits about me, and the last event for day one was the Ukrainian deadlift, and this is one of the two events that I was most excited for. I love the Ukrainian deadlift. It's one of my favorite deadlift variations, and above all else, the specific Ukrainian deadlift that they had here on this day was a massive cage apparatus that we were eventually going to be using for power stairs later on in the contest. But it took you up to a very high platform. It had a handle that went down to a bar that was connected to some really big tires, and even more so, it was connected to two big baskets on either side that the staff was loading with kegs. So you would have an increasing weight ladder of deadlifts. The whole platform was maybe about 12 feet wide, I want to say. I mean, it was a big apparatus, and it puts you very high up above everyone. It just looked badass. So I wanted to take a whack at being able to lift on this thing. I mean, it's one of my favorite deadlift variations, and it's a really cool apparatus too. I was walking around and I was able to move. I'm like, I'm just going to strap up my belt tight. I'm going to hold myself together as best I can, and I'm going to turn on the gas and see what I can do. So the weights were 620, 640, 700, 740, and 780. And if you got to the 780, you would be repping that for as many times as you could. I was, I believe, the first to go. Yeah, I was the first to go on this event because I was the last to finish on the previous medley. I get up there, I strap in, 620 goes up. It's fine. I mean, it's a joke weight for me. 660 goes up. Still feels very easy. 700 goes up. Feels Like it's getting heavier, but still well within my range. 740, when they throw those kegs in, I put on the gas. As soon as I put on the gas, my back gives out. Completely gives out. There's no power to even try to stick through a grind. And my hamstrings are just torched. My lumbar muscles are fried. There's nothing there. And even though I got those first 3 reps, 740 is a weight that I knew was in my wheelhouse. 780 was the one to where it's like, I don't know. We'll see. My all-time max in Ukrainian deadlift was 800 pounds. So 780, especially on a new apparatus, especially at a lighter version of myself, that was the one that I was unsure of. But 740, I wanted it, and I didn't get it. I felt very unsatisfied, but my back was tremendously impeded by the strain that it had just endured on the yoke. And that apparatus was strange, too. I would have loved to do a free weight Ukrainian deadlift, of course, in good conditions to where my body was able to hold up well. But the 12-foot long platform had 4 guide rails at each corner of the rectangular foundation you were standing on. And these guide rails helped keep the cages in line as you moved up. But what this did is this did not allow for a pendulum weight effect that you would have on a free weight Ukrainian deadlift. Instead, it forced you to have to stay in line. If you started deviating anteriorly or posteriorly, you would catch those rails and it would add some friction. And I mean, you could no longer have this be a very hip hinged, lower back and hamstring dominated lift. Now you have to stay very upright and almost treat it as a total squat. If there was any deviation forward or backward, you would be met with a wall of resistance and it would break your lift. So that was a very different type of Ukrainian deadlift than I had ever experienced. But I left this event feeling very unsatisfied. And at the end of day 1, I was feeling terrible. I was feeling terrible. Not only for the mental stuff, but the physical stuff. My back was hurting. I was getting tight. I was getting stiff. And I was routinely having to entertain the thoughts of not being able to do day 2. If my back started tightening up more like it had with my back injury back in May, I would not be able to walk. I would not be able to squat. The thought of driving home was just something that I couldn't even wrap my mind around. So as I'm getting back to my hotel, as I'm going about my routine, kind of making sure that, I'm loosening up when I can, doing some hip rotations. I take a shower and I put on some CBD rub that I have from one of my CBD sponsors, Canabolics. That's helping out a little bit. I have my Compex muscle stim unit that I've got on, and I'm doing everything that I can. I'm also eating, refueling. Somewhere around 8 p.m., I ultimately realized I came all this way for experience, and my back is not getting any worse than it already was. So I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to get some good rest, and I fully intend on waking up the next morning going to contest. And that's what I did. I woke up the next morning, day 2, and I'm not totally debilitated. My back is okay. It's stiff, and I'm sore, and I feel like I was hit by a freaking airplane. But I'm okay. I'm okay. Let's do this thing. I came for experience. Let's go. I have breakfast that day, and I did my warm-up routine from the hotel because on the day prior, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to stick around for day 2, so I changed my hotel reservation to where I was only staying through Friday night, and I would be leaving on Saturday. So I did everything I needed to at the hotel. I did my warm-ups, my foam rolls, a little bit of E-stim, hip rotations, some air squats, get myself feeling good, and then I check out from the hotel, head out the door, and I go to a Denny's, and I get a big, massive harvest grain pancake breakfast, and I wanted some complex carbohydrates to stick with me a little bit longer. Complex carbohydrates will take your body a little bit longer to fully metabolize compared to just white flour. They're going to stay with you a little bit longer. And I had noticed on day 1 that I started to feel my fuel reserves going down a little bit. That might have been because I got hurt and I was just feeling an overall sense of negativity and depletion, but I wanted to do a bigger breakfast in terms of the carb source. So those grain pancakes at Denny's really did the job. But I arrived back at the Olympia, got my $35 parking garage parking. As I'm walking up, carrying my bag from the distance of the parking garage to the corner of the expo center where America's Strongest Man is. My bag is full of a good amount of gear, and it's a duffel bag, an Evolution Athletics duffel bag that I have off to one side of my body. And having even just that weight on one side of my body is starting to pull on my back in weird ways. And just the walk, I mean, it was a long walk, but still just the walk from the parking garage to the Olympia. So feeling that, I mean, and knowing everything that happened on the day prior, I'm very unsure as to how the day's going to go. I'm unsure as to how my back is going to handle everything. But I'm not going to give up. I'm there. Traveled all the way. I'm there for experience. That's the one thing I had to keep telling myself is, Gabe, you're here for experience. And even in these moments where your body is falling short of what you want it to do, where you are getting hurt, I mean, where you're hurting, you are getting the experience of these competition events. You're getting the experience of knowing how your body is reacting to these certain stimuli. And that's invaluable. So that notion was what kept me going. The Circus Dumbbell Series is up first. 200 pounds, 215, 230, 250, 275 pounds. And the goal is for the athlete to go through there as fast as you can and get a mark for your time. This is my least favorite strongman event, with the exception of the tire flip. The tire flip is trash. I don't think it belongs in any strongman contest. But Circus Dumbbell is one of my least favorite events for the specific reason that every time I have trained it in prep leading up to any shows and I have competed, my elbows get totally trashed. I always wind up leaving with a crazy amount of triceps tendonitis, and it's tough. But Circus Dumbbell is one of those events that has historically been a challenge for me. So my event goal, honestly, was doing as best I could. The first dumbbell, the 200-pound dumbbell, if I got just that prior to going to the event in my mind, if I got just that, I would be totally happy with. So I'm one of the first to go. I think I'm one of the first to go. I can't remember the order of it was, but I get to that first dumbbell, I clean it, I press it, I lock it out, but in the time it took for me to receive a down command, I lost control of it. Our judge there was being very strict with most people, to where he was expecting like 3-second lockouts to hold it before you got it down. So in the time after I locked it out, I lost control of it and I had to bail the weight. And I did not get a down command. So I clean it, press it again, and I miss it on the second attempt. So here I am stuck on that first dumbbell. And again, just like on that axle, I feel all of the glare of the entire big crowd that's watching. And I know I have 75 seconds on my time limit. I take a step back, take some breaths. I know how zapped my energy was on that second attempt already, how much less power I had than on my first attempt. And that's just one of those things where it's like you bite as much energy as you can to give it a full, awesome effort. I cleaned it. I gave it everything I could, and it was a picture-perfect rep. I still had a couple of seconds left. I rushed over to the 215. I maybe had like 10 seconds. I cleaned it rapidly, give it everything I could, got very close to lockout, but ultimately the dumbbell deviated backwards a little bit. And I had to drop it behind me. And in that moment, to the people watching, it looked like it might have tweaked my shoulder or dislocated a little bit, but no, I just had to bail it behind me and get out of the way. But it got very close, so close to the point that I knew if I had gotten a good first rep on that 200, I would have gotten the 215, and I would have tried that 230. But to walk out of there knowing I got that 200, to walk out of there knowing that I could have done more, that feels good. And that feels good. And I have to say, my back was feeling a little bit wacky after that. I mean, you put 200 pounds on one side of the body and you dip up and down with leg drive explosively. Yeah, if you're feeling something in the lower back prior to that, it's going to exacerbate it a little bit. And it did, but not too bad. The thing that I am most proud of myself for is that I was fighting to the last second. I didn't miss that first rep and stop. You know, even in the midst of dealing with the injuries I sustained on the first day, I wanted that experience, and I fought to the very end. And talking to some spectators in the crowd, and even some of the commentators, like Travis Ortmeyer, that was one of the most memorable things for them to watch. I was as hard on myself as I could be. You have guys going and pressing a 275-pound dumbbell, and it almost belittles your 200-pound dumbbell in a way. But what meant most to a lot of the crowd and people watching was the fact that I did not give up, that I kept fighting, and I wound up getting that rep and allowing myself the opportunity to go to that next weight, fighting to the last second of a 75-second time limit. Next was the Natural Stone Series. And this was the pinnacle in terms of the events that I was most excited for. I had even gone and taken my daughter on a camping trip, just me and her in Colorado, for one of the purposes of getting to lift some natural stones out in the wild, one more level of practice and prep that I had prior to going to America's Strongest Man. And no two natural stones are the same. And as we're there throughout the whole contest weekend, the stones are backstage. We're seeing them, and they just look gnarly. Big stones. Some of them have good grips. Some of them don't. We had a 280. Very nice oval type stone. Very eroded by the elements. Round. Then we had a 290. Looked similar to the 280. Very oval, round. The next one was a 310 or 315. And this thing was long. It was big and it was long. It looked 4 feet long enough to the point where if you're trying to grab this on the ends, I mean, your arms are going to be really far stretched, and it's going to be a wide straddled hip pick, to where even though that was not the heaviest stone of the series, that was one of the stones that I felt was going to give all of us collective athletes the most challenge. Was just from how wide it was. And I'm thinking, myself is not one of them, but there's some guys out there that have some shorter arms and they're going to struggle with this thing. And even in the times that they're allowing us to kind of mess around with these stones, we didn't get a true warm-up with the stone, but we were able to go out in the field and kind of mess around with our hand placement and get a couple picks if we wanted to. You see guys, like I know Rob Kearney was messing around with different picks to where he was going to pick up one side and kind of try to have a very tilted pick, get a little closer. And I'm watching this, I'm like, it's going to take too much time, and you're going to have a lot more stress on one arm than the other. I'm like, I'm just going to try to pick this up completely horizontal, and that's the way that I would. That's the way that gives you most control. The next stone was a 340, and this thing was just absolutely massive. It looked like an asteroid. It was just really big, but it was long, and it had a good grip hole on either side to where you were able to get a good horizontal pick. So despite the fact that it was just truly huge, it had some good handholds. And then the last stone, a 370-pound stone. The whole show, the whole weekend, we see it there sitting on its pallet, and it just looks so intimidating. It's big, and it's got sharp edges, but no real good place to grab it to give you control of the center mass. And it was such a big stone that, sure, we were messing around with grip holds, but no one tried picking it up. And above all else, it was dusty. It still had like moss on it and stuff. So it was a dirty stone. And that was, oh man, it was just an interesting thing. We had that warm-up time that I was talking about to where we could kind of go to each stone, feel where our hand placement was. And that was an interesting moment. All of us athletes were there kind of talking to each other, bouncing off how we were going to do certain things, which a very high element of camaraderie and wanting to help each other out. Even talking about our own strategies when in reality we're going to go against each other. We are our own rivals. We still want everyone to have kind of their own best showing. We were allowed tacky towels on this event, and natural stone lifts, usually when I've trained them, they've always been in wild settings. I don't have chalk. I don't have tacky towel with me. You're sure not going to use tacky, but we were allowed tacky towels in this one. And I hadn't used a tacky towel in years. I remember this one of the first times I used it was when the Mike Bartos Stone of Steel came out. And that was just a new one. I mean, I didn't know how tacky towels were going to play a role, but I decided I'm going to use it. It is a grip adhesive. It doesn't leave residue on the stones, but tacky toweled up my hands, tacky toweled up my forearms, even wiped some tacky towel over my shirt. And then I tucked it into my belt so that as we're going through these stones, if they're dusty like that last one and that dust gets in the way, I'm at least able to quickly mat down on this towel that I have strapped to my belt, and I'm ready to go. I'm the first to go because of my placing on the dumbbell. Even though I had gotten that first dumbbell, again, I'm in a roster of guys that have no weaknesses. Everyone got that first dumbbell and then got to do more. So with me getting my lowest placing on that, I was the first to go on the stones. And a lot of us are very still unsure of that big stone at the end, but we're going to give it their all. One of my favorite things about natural stones is each one is like a puzzle that you're putting together. You're finding where that center mass is. You're finding where your handholds are, how you're going to wrap your arms around it. For me personally, it's like my eyes and my mind are doing a 3-dimensional scan of this thing up and down before I even touch it and kind of picking those points of attack. But I'm the first to go, and I'm telling myself I'm just going to be rhythmic, I'm going to be articulate, and I'm going to be deliberate. Stones are something that I feel confident in. It's something I've spent time and resources to get practice in on stones, even though I live in an area of the country where there are no stones. I get that 280. It's an easy stone right up to the platform. I pull the 290 to my lap, and in the moment as I'm pulling the 290, this nice oval stone with good grip holds, I feel a very violent snap come from my hand. A snap that I have felt before. In your fingers, there, right where each finger joint bends, there is a ligament called a pulley ligament that kind of wraps around in a ring. And what this does is this binds those tendons that are connected to your finger muscles, and it keeps it tight around the joint so that your fingers can close and be pulled like a pulley. And as soon as I pick that 290 stone up off the ground, just the very loud, violent snap comes from my right hand middle finger. And I knew, and I mean, I've done it before. There was no mistaking it. I tore the pulley ligament. So I've got the stone on my lap, and I have a popped finger, but I don't have any time to think about it. I'm in the moment of this contest event that I've been looking forward to the most. I've got 4 other fingers on my hand, and I'm just squeezing as hard as I can. I load that 290 from my lap to the platform, and I move on to this big, massive 315-pound stone. I get my arms set around it. I take my wide hip stance grip, and then I pull it right up. And it's such a narrow stone. Although it's long, it's narrow. And I'm pretty sure I went for a one motion, or a relatively quick one motion from the lap to the platform. I go to the 340. I can feel my hand is losing power in that one finger, but I'm gripping the holds with all of my other 4 fingers in that hand. It gets to my lap, up to the platform, and there it is, the 370. I don't pay any attention to my finger. I mean, yeah, I'm tuning it out. I'm not using it, but I'm finding my grip holds. I'm grabbing as far away as possible, getting as control of as much of the mass of the stone as possible before getting it to my lap. And I apply the power. It pops off the ground. It comes to my lap. I reset my grip, and boom, right to the platform. Easy. Easy. I'm the first man to go and the first man to load all 5 stones. And I just feel absolutely elated. All of those feelings of doubt and pain and hurt from the previous day's injury and not knowing if I'd be able to do this, being the first to go, not knowing how my body's going to hold up against this largely back-powered event, and getting all of the stones, getting that final heavy stone, it meant the absolute world to me. I scream out in just like absolute elation. I raise up my hands to the crowd, and I'm just so pumped and overjoyed in my performance. I go backstage, get off some of my gear, and then I immediately go behind the live stream booth to watch the next athletes as they're going. And sure enough, many of the athletes are not even able to get that final stone. It's just too cumbersome and too overpowering, too large, too odd. My time holds as the leading time for a while. I had even edged out one athlete who got all 5 stones, and by a second, I held him, not even a second, a partial second, I was faster than him. But the advantage that the athletes have who have gotten enough points to where they're in the leads is they get to go last in these competition heats. So they're getting to watch how we do certain things. And by the time you make it to the guys who are in first, second, and third, they've seen all the other athletes go, what gives them success to where there's no longer doubts in their mind, and they know what times they have to beat to where it's like, you just got to operate, and you got to operate fast if you're going to get that first time. And that's what we saw. You watched Lucas Hatton's run on that stone series, and it is just mind-blowing how fast it is. But he is also not holding anything back because he's in contention for that $25,000, and he's seen all the other guys do it. So regardless of how quick some of those guys were able to get those 5 stones loaded, I was just riding an absolute high from being able to get all of those stones, being the first to go, and kind of really not being held back by the injuries that I had sustained at that point. There was one event left, the power stairs, and my body was hurting. Even though, you know, the stones were able to be done, my back was tight, and it was still feeling beat up from the previous day. And now I've got a torn ligament in my hand that is really starting to just throb. My fingers getting just more swollen by the minute. Power stairs is powered by the back, the hips. You have to hold on to this pin with your hands. I didn't know if doing the event was going to be a good move. I mean, yeah, I'm here for the experience, and it's the last event of the show, but I now know I have torn connective tissue in my hand. Is enduring this event going to be something that is a smart thing to do? Am I going to walk away with a net positive if I do, or do I need to not do it and just kind of keep myself out of it for the sake of preserving my performance in future conquests? I don't know if my back is going to hold, but I did a couple of warm-up reps on a pin that they had backstage, and they had already had power stress set up. So the pin that we had backstage was not loaded with a crazy amount of weight, maybe I think like between 250 and 300 pounds. And I was able to focus on my grip from all my other fingers rather than that one middle finger. And it felt okay. So, I mean, that wasn't really a warm-up, but it was enough to at least keep my hands closed on something and like, okay, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do what I can. If I go out there, I lift that first pin and nothing's able to happen because of my hand and my back, so be it. I tried. I gave it my all. I'm not going to just pull out of this event and not try. So the main goal here, prior to getting hurt, was to do power stairs because I had never done power stairs in contests. And it's a fun-looking event because you go head-to-head with another athlete. I had trained power stairs rigorously for World's Strongest Man 2022. I even went and had some training session in with Brian Shaw at his gym, and we both ran power stairs. Power stairs were an event in the final of World's Strongest Man that year. I didn't make it to the final, but I had trained power stairs. This would, though, be the first time I ever got to do the event in competition. So this is that exact level of experience I had gone there for. I was a second heat to go after Alan Colley. I was going head-to-head with Dylan Thompson, a very tall athlete, an athlete who's got at least 4 inches on me in height. And I knew with his extra height that these power stairs, it was going to play to his advantage and how quick he was going to be able to, in one motion, essentially get from one stair to the next. But I was rhythmic. I picked up that first pin and I moved it to the first stair, and I just kept going, one stair after the next, pick and repick. I was, although I was being very deliberate, I felt I was able to jump up without having to take little steps up. I was able to jump up with each stair, at least for those first 2 pins. I can't remember the exact weights. I want to say they were 480, 520, and 540. I might be wrong there, but they were pro. It was a pro series level weight. And I get to that final pin, and I have not lost any rhythm. I get to that final stair, the 12th step, and Dylan has stalled out. He can't get his pin on the final step. Although he had edged me out in speed on those previous pins, probably largely due to his height and how explosive he is, I get to that final one. He stalled out. I load it onto the platform. It's there. I lift my hands up, and I've beat him. And not that that's important or anything, but the more important thing is I'm done. I finished the contest. In the moments of doubt that I had that I would be able to even finish, I complete the power stairs. I just look out to the crowd. I cheer for myself and my counterpart, Dylan, right there. Like we've finished America's Strongest Man. I reach over to him, embrace him, and I kid you not, in that moment, I am just so full of emotion, of elation. I honestly wanted to burst out into tears, just from everything it took to push through and endure that final moment. And I get down from the power stairs. I take off my belt and everything. And at that point, I don't even care what anyone else does. I'm walking to the restroom at that point to kind of just wash my hands, get the chalk off of them. And in that moment, I feel choked up. Like my body is hurting, yeah, and my hand is hurting, but I'm just so overcome with emotion that I had finished the show. And that was it was a moment of relief and catharsis that I won't forget. There was so much doubt in knowing whether or not I would be able to, and I did. And I get to walk out with the experience that I came for. And that was the trophy itself. That was the ultimate goal, was to walk and leave with experience that would propel me forward in my career as a strongman and help me shape the training plan going from here on out. So leaving the contest afterwards, there were a lot of memorable interactions on that day. But above all else, this roster, like I had said earlier, was full of guys with no weaknesses. These were all pros. And even on guys that had weaker events, there were no weaknesses. And that was really, really cool to compete on a roster where there were no handouts on any event. Like, there was no guys that you were automatically going to beat. Like, this was contentious. There was a moment after I finished the power stairs where, being the second heat to go, I'm walking backstage and all the other guys are right there at the curtain watching everyone do it. Marcus Crowder was right there, an athlete I'm very fond of. I got to compete with him for the first time back in 2016 at North Carolina Strongest Man, and seeing all the mileage he's covered since then. I mean, he's got some of the strongest shoulders ever. I mean, one other guy who has pressed over 400 pounds is going for that big record. Marcus tells me as I walk back, he gives me a pat on the back and says, "Welcome back." And those two words, so simple yet so eloquent, they meant the word. They meant the world to me. And I don't know, it's kind of like this athlete who I have been watching over the course of the past year while I've kind of taken a break from things, watch him just really push at it. Someone I remember from earlier on in my career, for him to welcome me back into competitive strongman, that just felt really cool and really great to hear. There was another moment at the end of the show where Mitchell Hooper, World's Strongest Man, made it a point to come up to me and told me how good it was to see me back in action, to see me back chasing this path of strength, knowing that regardless of how I did there on that day, it was just a stepping stone. And, you know, he's World's Strongest Man. He has so many other things that he's focusing his energy on, but he made it a point to stop what he was doing, to come and find me and tell me how great it was to see me back. Getting to share the backstage area with my good friend Corey Butler. I got to watch her give a incredibly strong performance all weekend. I mean, it was just, her strength is insane. And she wound up finishing on the podium. But even getting to watch her from the third person perspective, I got to understand how we are always so hard and so critical of ourselves. Even though she stood on the podium, inside she wanted so much more. And to see those immediate moments after contest of the athlete, you know, feeling a little bit, I don't know if negative is the right word, but knowing that they fell short of where they wanted to be, it's powerful, because you have one of the strongest women in the world right there. Just give her absolute best and strongest performance on everything, and it still wants more. It just goes to show you the immense amount of power we have within to be chasing and to be putting in all this effort and work for something that may or may not happen, but we're sure as hell going to give it our all. It was just, she's such a joy to be around, and I really love every chance that I get to hang out with her. But sharing that backstage area, watching her go and watching her just constantly aim for the absolute highest point, it's powerful, it's inspiring, it's motivating. I'm damn proud to call her my friend. But after I said my goodbyes to everyone, you know, got to socialize with the crowd and some fans for a while, I got in my car and I hit the road. 19 hours straight back home. Leaving a competition and driving straight 1,400 miles, 19 hours with no rest. I didn't stop at all this time. That was tough. I mean, you are tired as can be after a contest as it is. But I had no desire to stick around in Orlando, and I wanted to get back home. So I did. And I made it back home safely. I got back home at 11 a.m. the next day on Sunday morning. So how is my body holding up? Well, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know I'm a bit sniffly. Apologies for that. Being at the Olympia, I was around a lot of people, and it seems like I picked up a little bug, or maybe it's just something seasonal. But aside from that, my back did not get any worse. That was something I was very fearful of, especially with that long drive back home. I didn't know if my back was going to start tightening up on me to where ambulating was going to be a problem. But my back is sore, and it is very stiff in that area, but nothing that is giving me any big concerns as to having hurt myself again. My finger, on the other hand, that ligament is definitely torn. It got very swollen. The swelling has gone down significantly, but it's going to be very annoying in training for a while. It's going to really impede a lot of the pulling motions that I have. But it's not a tough injury to heal from. It will heal on its own. Probably about 4 weeks I'll be dealing with it. But the finger is definitely going to be a nuisance for a bit. And I will say, after I got my first good sleep on Sunday night and I woke up Monday morning, that's when the soreness really kicked in. I mean, I had been saying I got hit by an airplane or a train. I mean, I definitely felt even more of that on Monday. But that's to be expected after a contest. So my body is holding up pretty well, all things considered. And although I took a major hit with that yoke, I don't think it's going to be following me around in a negative way. And I will use the experience of this weekend to charge everything ahead on the horizon. That being said, I haven't really trained yet. I did a bench press session to get just a little bit of an arm pump, but I haven't done anything backloaded. So I guess I'll follow up with you guys on how I'm really feeling after I get back to some squats and deadlifts. But the takeaways from America's Strongest Man, as it does lay the framework for my competitive 2024. There were moments in the contest where, as I'm sitting backstage, I'm talking to Eric Dawson and Alan Colley, and we're talking about all the areas of our bodies, our backs, our knees that hurt. And you have the three of us talking, and then further away, right by the curtains, watching all the action going on, you have all the new guys. Well, I say the new guys, but the younger pros, the pros who have had a little bit less mileage on their bodies, a little bit less injuries, and they're just the YOLO guys. They're going out there balls to the wall every single time, like just as fresh as can be. Their warm-ups are not nearly as extensive as ours. And I had kind of like an out-of-body experience where I see myself from above, and I realized that I'm one of the old guys now. I might only be 33 years old, but I'm one of the old guys. I've had plenty of injuries. I have aches and pains. And I've had a lot of competition experience to where I may not be a master's athlete, but I'm not one of the young guys anymore. And that's kind of a interesting realization to have. Another realization and takeaway that I had from this contest is that driving as long of a distance as I did is such a tremendous stressor on my body. When it comes time to competing again, and my intent is fully winning and dominating, if I do opt to drive anywhere, I would need to make sure that I give myself a cushion of at least 2 or 3 days after that drive to really recoup. I would be a fool to not think that drive did not play a role, pardon the double negative there, but I'd be a fool to think that the drive did not play a role on how my body got impacted by the yoke. Sitting down for 19 hours straight, I mean, that's some postural stuff that needs to really be addressed. So whether I drove or if I flew to my next contest, that's something I'm going to take into account, is how my body really responded to driving as long of a distance as I did. Another big takeaway, I need to make leaps on my overhead presses. If I can get to a highly competitive level of strength with my overhead press, that's massive points. I know I'm coming back from a massive body transformation to where I lost 40 pounds and gained some of it back, and that does affect my overhead pressing power. But in this off season, I need to really make some headway on my overhead press to where I am one of the guys with a 400 plus pound overhead press. That's big points that I'm not getting, and that's big points I need. Another takeaway, my stones are solid. And this is something I've proven to myself time and time again, whether it's Atlas stones or natural stones. I have spent a lot of effort and a lot of resources, a lot of time training stones. It's something I truly enjoy, and it shows. So this takeaway is more of like affirming the confidence that I have in myself when I step up to the stones in contests. When it's time to go, there should be no voices of doubt in my mind because my stone loads are solid. And even on that natural stone series, I didn't get the highest placing time, but I was also being very deliberate, very articulate, but very careful. And I still did very well. But then the final takeaway is, what the hell is up with yoke? Prior to turning pro, when I was an amateur, I was one of the best yoke runners in the nation. And I say yoke runners because that's what I did. I ran with yoke. But every time I've had yoke as a pro, in contest, it has been the bane of my existence. And I know in the large portion of my pro career, I was enduring knee injuries, and that played a big role in how tough yoke was for me to do. But, I think of the Shaw Classic in 2021, Shaw Classic 2022, the car carry in World's Strongest Man 2022, the car carry in Glasgow 2021 for Giants Live. Every time I've done yoke in contests as a pro, it has not gone well, and I need to fix this. So I think I'm going to have to really spend time working on not just speed, but a lot of long duration yoke sessions. Not maybe long duration in terms of long distance, but long duration in terms of like lots of sets, like 6 working set type stuff, like really getting my body conditioned to moving with heavy weight over a distance effectively. So who do I hope this story reaches? The story of me jumping into contests, of me getting myself there for the experience. I hope that if there's people out there who are really on the fence about getting themselves into contest, that they stop being their own worst enemy and they just jump on in. Because even in the midst of everything that I faced in this contest, I am walking away with tremendous experience and know-how and a very in-tune connection with how my body handled these things, to where when I say you can gain more from 1 or 2 days of competing than 6 months of training, that's not hyperbole. That's true. You can never replicate those exact competition conditions in training. You can't. It's impossible. So if there's that person who has been training well, that they stop being their own worst enemy and then just get into contest. And I also hope this story reaches athletes who may have sustained an injury in the recent past, and that they are able to find the willpower to give themselves that motivation, that inner inspiration, that inner drive to get back into contests, to not worry so much about where the cards will fall, but to worry more about the moment, the reason why as you're going down this path, having fun and doing your best and feeling what it's like to demand that full power of your body. I hope it reaches those people, the people that are on the fence about getting back into contests. I did it. It wasn't easy, but I did it. And now I am charged up by the experiences I get to take away, to where whatever competition comes next is going to be a damn powerful one. And on that note, the next competition for myself is the Olympic City Pro-Am in Colorado Springs. The roster has filled up fast, and it's very exciting. They had to close the Pro-Am roster because there's too many people on it now. So it's going to be a fun show. But that's in March 23rd, I believe, of next year. And unlike America's Strongest Man, this contest, Colorado Springs contest, is several months in the horizon. There's plenty of off-season training between now and then. I'm not going there just for the experience. I'm going there for domination. That's the intent. That's the goal. I'm going there to win. So a lot of what I gained experience-wise, knowledge-wise from America's Strongest Man is going to really shape and pave the way, brick by brick, on my training sessions between now and then, and that victory that I'm going for. So I've got a powerful off-season and strengthening ahead. I need to make these headways on my overhead press, on my yoke, on my carries, and just become stronger overall. I do want to keep some steady conditioning. I think a lot of what I got to take away from my experience of this past summer in transforming and getting down to a lighter body weight, it reaffirmed the importance of staying healthy. I want to be able to keep that gas pedal down on like the 60-second max reps events, or the events to where, you're trying to cram as much work into a tight time frame as possible, and not have to worry about my conditioning keeping up with me. So I know I haven't, honestly, full disclosure, I have not run since the mountain peaks back in August, but I would like to run again. I like to do some light running. Maybe not some crazy running, but some running to keep up my conditioning. This is the time of year in Texas, too, where it's the best time to go out and run. So that's the plan. We'll see how many sessions I have out there and running in the meantime, in the next couple of weeks. But thank you guys for being along for that journey, and I really appreciate all the support that I received while I was out there in Orlando, and all the support I received both leading up to and after the event. It means the world to me, and I really thank you for sticking through. It's just a stepstone. If you had expectations of me for America's Strongest Man, I'm sorry if I let them down, but this is not the show to have any expectations of me other than me going out there and doing my thing. That's the Olympic City Pro-Am next. So Colorado Springs, March 23rd, 2024. Be there. It's going to be one for the books. And now, my favorite part of the show. Let's space out together, guys. There's a lot that has been going on in the realm of space. And this episode of Titan Talk, this space out, we're going to talk about space planes. Yeah, space planes, like airplanes, but for space. So, Sierra Space, a company that is headquartered out of Colorado, has their space plane, the Dream Chaser. They have recently shipped out Unit 1 of their space plane, Dream Chaser. They shipped it out from Colorado to Ohio to start undergoing environmental testing with NASA. This space plane is named Tenacity, and what a great name for their first unit to be shipped out. The environmental testing that it's going through now, the plane is constructed, it's made, it's going to this Ohio NASA base to where it will go through some vacuum tests. It'll be put through all of the intense elements that it will face in space conditions to see if it can hold up with pressure, with temperatures, with heat shielding, all of that stuff. And that's exactly why it's being shipped there. It's kind of like with that last final box that needs to be checked prior to its launch. So Tenacity is a cargo variant of this space plane. It is contracted to be a resupply ship for the International Space Station, and it'll launch as early as March 2024 through a NASA contract. This contract has 7 resupply missions already between Earth and the space station. Tenacity is going to launch on top of a United Launch Alliance Vulcan Centaur rocket. This is a new rocket, which is actually making its debut launch in December 24th, Christmas Eve of this year. So in a little over a month, it'll be launching for the first time, the Vulcan rocket, and it'll be launching the Astrobotics Peregrine Lunar Lander as its first mission. So this is interesting to point out because this is a new rocket which is making its debut launch. It's going to be launching a pretty sweet lunar lander, but the March 2024 launch of Tenacity is going to depend heavily on how successful this Vulcan Centaur rocket is able to send its first launch load up into space, into the moon. But Dream Chaser will be the only re-entry vehicle capable of low-G landings. It's critical for delicate science, live animals, and crew. And low G, I mean, how many Gs these vehicles pull when they're coming back into the surface of Earth? I mean, if you have anything mildly delicate, whether it's molecular structures, live animals, or even cargo, being able to have a softer type landing is essential. And I believe it's 1.5 Gs at most is what this landing is going to be for Dream Chaser. Now, Dream Chaser, it's a space plane. So this means it can land on any compatible runway in the world. Pretty much any outfitted commercial runway, it can land. And that makes it a very versatile piece of vehicular transport because you're not limited to splashdowns in the ocean. You're not limited to a select few spaceports. You can land this thing as needed on commercial runways. It's a quarter of the size of the space shuttle. Very small, and it's small enough to be put into a rocket fairing and mounted on top of these rockets like the Vulcan Centaur. It's got 12,000 pounds of cargo launch that it can take up into orbit, up into space. And that's significant. That's a lot of poundage. Although it only has 4,000 pounds of cargo it can return. So the return cargo, it's a little bit different mechanics, right? Because now the plane is landing on its own without the propulsion assistance of a massive rocket beneath it. So there's a little bit difference of how much cargo it can take up versus how much cargo it can bring down. But 4,000 pounds of cargo is still a lot. And there's a lot of versatility when you have a reusable vehicle that can land at any commercial airport. This Tenacity is a cargo variant of the space plane. And like I said, it's got 7 contracted resupply missions to take cargo to and from the International Space Station. But there will be crewed variants of this, whether they are for government or Space Force purposes or for private purposes. The crewed variants can support 7 people, if not a little bit more. Each Dream Chaser is built to withstand 3,000 degrees of Fahrenheit upon reentry and can make at least 15 flights. So reusability is high on this vehicle. Now, what this means for the future of accessible space travel is we have a reusable vehicle that is not restricted to the rocket in terms of reentry. It is put on top of a rocket and launched up to space, but it can reenter on its own. It can land on an airport and can be retrieved from an airport and easily shipped back and forth. This is huge when we start thinking of experiments that are conducted in our orbital laboratory, the International Space Station, or any other laboratories that are launched in the coming years. You can easily get things up to them. You can maneuver well while in space in this very agile and nimble vehicle, and you can re-enter the atmosphere and land on any commercial spaceport. This is accessibility in its prime definition. So, and you think of that tonnage that it can bring down to 4,000 pounds. If we're thinking on the horizon of decommissioning the space station within the next 7 or so years, if there's components we need to bring from that space station down, although 4,000 pounds is a relatively limiting factor, this is now one of the very few, if not the only vehicle that can bring things back at such a high level of versatility and accessibility. So Tenacity is undergoing its environmental testing. It is set to launch in March, early spring of next year, and that's going to be one to watch to really see how it goes well, because this is the cargo variant version of it, but I'm really curious to see how it paves the way for the crewed missions ahead. But this is not the only space plane out there. The United States Space Force, the USSF, has their very mysterious X-37B orbital space plane that has been kind of in the news, but very discreetly over the past couple years. But now it has made its way to the news again. Mission 7 of the X-37B is scheduled for December 7th to launch this year, in a month. It's going to launch atop a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket, the most powerful commercial rocket that is available right now to launch loads into orbit, the SpaceX Falcon Heavy. Now, the X-37B orbital plane has been shrouded in mystery for a while. This is a relatively classified plane that is for Space Force. Because it's been shrouded in mystery, we don't really know what all it has been up to. There has been speculation that it is going to be an orbital weapons platform to where Space Force can maintain its dominance up in, various orbital regimes. There is also speculation that it's just going to be a way of kind of like a stepping stone for future iterations of this craft it's something it's an asset that Space Force needs to maintain security of all levels of Earth's orbit, low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and high Earth orbit. But this plane, again, it has been so shrouded in mystery. We don't really know the extent of its capabilities. It did set a record for being in orbit for, I believe, 900 plus days to really test its systems and its ability to sustain and endure these orbital patterns. But regarding the Mission 7, for the X-37B, scheduled for December 7th. Space Force put out a statement saying that Mission 7 will have a wide range of test and experimentation objectives. These tests include operating the reusable spaceplane in new orbital regimes, experimenting with future space domain awareness technologies, and investigating radiation effects on materials provided by NASA. This is a direct statement from Space Force itself. And I mean, let's break it down. A wide range of tests and experimentation objectives, including operating the reusable spaceplane in new orbital regimes. We have all the different types of orbit. You have the LEO, MEO, and the high Earth orbit. So far, all of the commercial satellites, including the International Space Station, are in low Earth orbit, and I believe that is an area that extends from, right above the Earth's atmosphere all the way to 1,200 miles above the Earth's atmosphere, above the Earth. And then you have medium Earth orbit, which is another interval, and then you have the high Earth orbit, which is another interval. And this is obviously a matter of security, is if you have actors or anything going on in that low Earth orbit that are becoming threats to current satellites, or you have collisions, or you have things that need to be inspected or decommissioned, well, you have this X-37B that is capable of maneuvering well and highly there in low Earth orbit. But you can also go higher to medium Earth orbit, or to the furthest away, far Earth orbit. You need to have dominance there if you're going to be Space Force in their mind. You need to be able to stay one step ahead of Russia and China, and to have surveillance technologies capable of not just being there in low Earth orbit, but being much further away to where you have a wide range of view of everything that's going on beneath you. So the SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket, being much heavier than previous rockets that have launched X-37B to space, it's speculated that this heavy rocket is aimed to get X-37B to an even higher orbit. And this is what we hear in this statement of new orbital regimes, of being able to establish new dominance in medium and high Earth orbit, and experimenting with future space domain awareness technologies. You can imagine that the X-37B is going to be equipped with certain types of surveillance technologies, to where in these higher orbits it is going to be able to have a wide and omniscient view of everything that's going on, whether it's commercial satellites or enemy military satellites, whatever it is. This is going to put it in a high position to where it can have its vigilance, if you will, over everything. Experimenting with future space domain awareness technologies. That's kind of a broad subject, but again, alluding to the dominance that Space Force wants to have. And the last one, investigating the radiation effects on materials provided by NASA. One of the X-37B's few disclosed actual objectives is that it's going to be studying how plants are affected by the sustained radiation effects of these various orbit patterns. And this has been specifically stated by NASA and provided by them. And there are various radiation threats in different orbital patterns. And you need to know that your vehicle can not just protect these plants, but can protect future crewed missions as well, because we are organic machines, and radiation can have some pretty nasty effects on our bodies. But the large majority of this plane's capabilities still are ever shrouded in mystery. It is a highly classified piece of technology, and we can only imagine what Space Force has in store for it. Again, like I said earlier, many have speculated that this is a weapons platform. And if you're trying to get into these new orbital regimes first and have dominance, it just makes sense from a tactical military perspective that you have some sort of weapons involved in there. But largely classified piece of technology, and this is the X-37B orbital space plane. So we'll see what is in store for this piece of technology. But those are the two space planes in news right now: Sierra Space's Dream Chaser and Space Force's X-37B. It's interesting to see space planes kind of make their way back into more frequent discussion and exploration, because both of these space planes have elements that are very nostalgic of the retired shuttle program. And, the shuttle was such a monumental advancement in technology. You have this massive vehicle that is capable of carrying tremendous cargo loads like the Hubble telescope up into orbit and beyond. And then it's able to either come back down the atmosphere and land on top of an airplane or land onto a runway like we saw with Discovery and any of the other previous iterations of the space shuttle program. But they look really cool, and I'm really hoping that the testing goes well, because a lot of years, a lot of hours, a lot of technological innovation has been put into each of these vehicles, and it's just one way that the horizons of space is expanding. And lastly, on today's Space Out, Starship Orbital Flight 2, the Integrated Flight 2, is on the horizon. We don't have an exact date as of yet. It is early morning on November 10th right now as I'm recording this, but it's happening. Navigation warnings are officially in place. Maritime navigation are in place. Navigation warnings are in place for both the Gulf of Mexico and Hawaii from November 13th through 18th. And these are listing the possible dangers of a rocket launch. Now, if you know the mission parameters for the Starship orbital flight test, it will launch from Boca Chica Starbase, and it will go into orbit. It will move around the Earth for, I believe, about 90 minutes before it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere and splashes down off the coast of Hawaii. So to see these maritime warnings already in place, sure, this could be SpaceX just having one box already checked off prematurely if they get that launch license from the FAA. But it is pretty cool to already see these official statements and these official warnings in place. Like, it could happen. And again, this is for November 13th through 18th, a 5-day range. Mid-month November, which is a date range all of the higher-ups in SpaceX have already been actively saying and touting as a possible launch date. And here's the next big one. As of November 9th, the Flight Termination System, the FTS, has been installed onto Starship. This is a crucial part of the pre-launch procedure that we know is alluding to a very near launch date. The Flight Termination System is essentially explosive charges that are installed all throughout the ship. In the case that, like with Orbital Flight Test 1, where the ship needs to be self-destructed because of a failed launch or something going wrong. But this step is not done until the very final days prior to launch, because you are literally putting explosive charges on a rocket. And why would you do that, adding an element of danger, unless you're ready to go? So, as of November 9th, the FTS has been installed. Starship is, by all accounts, ready to launch. Now, when we do get a launch date, first I'll be jumping up and down cheering, knowing that we have a date to where I can go out there and watch this thing again. But everything rides on the first 3 minutes of flight. Everything rides in terms of, is this a success? Now, what happens in the first 3 minutes of flight? Propellant loads all go in clearly. Everything's held, pressurized. I know with the first integrated flight test attempt, not April 20th, but a couple days prior, there was a pressurization issue, and they had to scrub the launch. So load it with propellant, make sure everything's pressurized and set. Good. Everything launches, all engines activate together, and they don't take any of each other out. Good. Is the launch pad protected? All of these many changes that have been done for the orbital launch mount itself. Is that new water deluge system spraying the water upward? The super cooled steel plate underneath the launch pad. Is this able to protect the launch pad that was so badly damaged with the last flight test? Because if not, look how long it took for SpaceX to rebuild and reconstruct the launch pad. I know we've been waiting for a launch license for a while now, but it took 4+ months for them to reconstruct and rebuild. So if the launch pad was taken out again, that would be a big setback for SpaceX. Now, as the rocket, as the whole Starship lifts off, are those engines able to keep themselves online? There were several engines that went out last time. Several engines that, as one engine experienced failure or and otherwise exploded, it took out another engine right next to it. And you had multiple engine failure as the rocket was propelling upwards to space. These rockets now have, or the Raptor engines now have new gimbals, and to where they are controlled electronically rather than hydraulically. Is this a good change? And are they able to control and steer the ship well, stay alive? Is the ship able to sustain itself through max Q, the highest point of atmospheric pressure and stress on the vehicle? And here's the biggest one. This is the one where SpaceX will consider it a success. Is stage separation able to occur? Is Starship able to separate from the Super Heavy booster successfully? If it is a success, and anything that happens beyond that point is an overwhelming success. Sure, we want to see the ship make it to orbit and splash down off Hawaii, but really, if these two things separate from each other, mission accomplished. So, last orbital flight test, their stage separation failed. The components that were supposed to push the vehicles apart were jammed together, and that's when you saw Starship starting to tumble in the atmosphere, doing a few somersaults before it finally and imminently blew up over the Gulf Coast, or over the Gulf of Mexico. But now a hot staging ring has been in place. It's about a 6-foot tall apparatus that is mounted on top of the Super Heavy booster and under Starship, and it has these exhaust vents and a cone. That what's going to happen is Starship, prior to the two stages separating, is going to ignite its engines on top of the booster. So this staging ring is going to deflect the flames outward through the vents, so that all of that power from those engines under Starship is not just beaming right down into the Super Heavy booster. And that this is something that you still have to be very worried of, because although most of the Super Heavy's fuel will have been expended at that point, it still does have fuel in it for its re-entry burns to slow that massive booster down and eventually catch it back at the orbital launch mount. Now, that won't happen on this one. It will attempt a soft splashdown to where it's going to try to slow itself down before crashing into the waters of the Gulf. But there's still fuel in that rocket booster. So when you have Starship barreling down flames coming out of its engines into a booster, you want to know that those flames are deflected. So I'm curious to see how this hot staging ring works. Compared to the relative size of both parts of the ship, it is pretty small. But is it enough to deflect the flames away from the booster? And more importantly, is it enough to push Starship away from Super Heavy as it makes its way into orbit? If stage separation occurs, it's a success. And everything after that point is huge. And that way we know Starship is on track. It could possibly keep up with these ambitious timelines that Musk has set out for the program. And more importantly, the Artemis missions that Starship is commissioned and contracted for to carry astronauts to the moon and back. After orbital flight test 2, one of the next objectives for Starship will be refueling in orbit. That is going to be the next crucial component to where we will get a Starship tanker version up there into orbit and then send another subsequent Starship, all of which are already built and are waiting, and see if it can refuel itself in orbit. Because refueling is going to be a massive, massive milestone in getting into orbit first, refueling, and having enough fuel to go to the moon and back to Earth. But it's all on the horizon. Exciting times ahead. Space planes, classified Space Force missions, and Starship second integrated test flight. To you, all my friends across this universe of power, I have a message. Be empowered by the experience you amass. Live for the moment of every day, and remain steadfast in making a better tomorrow. This has been Titan Talk. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.